Thank you. When parents send their children to school, I think they want three things. Firstly, that their children are able to read, write and count properly, and don't let anybody tell me that that is old-fashioned. They want good quality discipline, and they want a well-rounded education both inside and outside the classroom. And all that, of course, is dependent on good quality teaching. Presiding Officer, I don't think any of that is too much to ask. And so when Nicola Sturgeon told education leaders on the 19th of August 2015 that education was her #1 priority, I agreed with her. Even more so when 6 months later she reiterated that commitment and she told us that there would be a new education bill forthcoming promising greater devolution to schools. Maybe, just maybe, the collective findings of the Donaldson, McCormack, Cameron and Bloomer reports into Scottish school education, all carried out by experts in their fields between 2011 and 2016, were beginning to sink in. Namely, that Scottish education, despite all the things on which it could pride itself, needed to be shaken out of its complacency and moved on. Incidentally, exactly the same was said by Howie 2 decades before. Of course, these reports appeared at the very same time that the OECD, the Scottish Survey of Attainment, PISA, Reform Scotland, the Scottish Government's own statistics, all produced compelling evidence that Scotland was flatlining when it came to attainment, and worse still, that the attainment gap between rich and poor was widening, thereby disadvantaging large numbers of young people, something which had always been fundamentally at odds with the basic principles of good Scottish education, once renowned across the world. And let's be clear that the principles of that Scottish education articulated very well with the Curriculum for Excellence as set out by Peter Peacock. I was even more encouraged when in 2017, the Programme for Government, it proclaimed, and I quote, "A new education bill will deliver the biggest and most radical change to how our schools are run." Nicola Sturgeon even went as far in the Scotland on Sunday article to say that the London model of cluster schools was worth looking at because it was delivering good results for more disadvantaged pupils. And John Swinney, when reflecting on the poor performance of one particular local authority, told us, and I quote again, "The status quo was not an option." So what on earth went wrong in the SNP High Command? Why, after the successive tenures of Fiona Hislop, Mike Russell, Angela Constance, John Swinney and now Shirley-Anne Somerville, are we failing to deliver better outcomes after all the professional advice that we have received? For me, it comes down mainly to three things. Firstly, that teachers have been sufficiently undervalued as key professionals, and Graham Donaldson at the time had very interesting things to say about that, particularly as he said that too many teachers were reporting that they felt uncomfortable with regard to some gaps in their professional training. And of course it doesn't help when we see the soaring number of cases of verbal and physical assaults, as mentioned by Stephen Kerr. Secondly, the Scottish Government has shown an extraordinary unwillingness to properly reform the agencies in education. Not just rebadge them, Michael Mara made some excellent points about this, or move the deck chairs round a bit, but properly reform them to reflect the support that is available to teachers. Because no one can argue that Education Scotland and the SQA have had a happy history in recent times. Indeed, when I was on the Education Committee of this Parliament for a very substantial number of years, hardly a term went past without the committee's attention being drawn to significant problems within the agencies. Problems that meant that teachers felt remote and frustrated by these education agencies, and that can never be a blueprint for a successful education system. And thirdly, I want to mention the lack of rigour, because it comes back to the structure and the delivery of the curriculum. Back in 1992, Professor John Howie reflected on the abiding strength of the breadth of Scottish education in relation to England, but he also wanted to see a European-style baccalaureate which introduced much more depth and rigour in assessment of the Scottish system. We should have listened more to what he said. And the Scottish Government, through Mike Russell, attempted a Scottish baccalaureate, but that never took off because of the weak structure and the poor uptake of Scottish pupils. And part of that issue has manifested itself in the problems over subject choice, which was debated so many times in the previous parliaments on the back of the work of Professor Jim Scott. And in one of these debates, John Swinney told me that if we counted up the subjects that are on offer in Scottish schools, we would actually have more of them now than we had before. Well, he's right if he uses that accounting method, but he couldn't deny that the subjects for arts, for social sciences and for science have been very badly squeezed, bringing about further difficulties in the curriculum. And it's all very well having good skills, they're important, but if you don't actually know things as well, then these skills aren't much use. Presiding Officer, there is no getting away from the fact that both the quantitative and qualitative evidence tells that Scottish schools are stuck in a rut when it comes to raising attainment across the board. That has been happening across the board on the SNP's watch for a very long time. And the longer that rut persists, then there is a fundamental problem in taking this forward. Far too many children remain functionally illiterate, which is a major concern to employers, and that is despite more public spending per head of pupil. So it's not about the money, it's about the system. We have a huge opportunity to get our education system right. We need a vision of Scottish education in an all-round capacity, a vision that will not just suit the economy, but one which promotes a fair-minded, ethical society in which individuals are valued for who they are, both pupils and teachers alike. We need an education system in which every individual is encouraged to reach for the stars with schools of ambition, and where every step of the way we are promoting excellence rather than the lowest common denominator, which far too often is the trademark of education policy.